This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. Today's conversation takes us to the intersection of technology and humanity in a way that few people explore. My guest, John Kamer, began their career in cybersecurity protecting data, privacy, and trust in the digital world. But their path took an unexpected turn into the deeply human, deeply personal realm of grief. Now, as a grief support innovator, John is pioneering the use of AI to create tools that honor loss, respect vulnerability, and provide comfort without shortcuts, surveillance, or exploitation. In this episode, we will explore how John's background in security informs their approach to protecting people at their most vulnerable moments, how AI can play a role in grief without ever replacing human empathy, and how lived experience shapes the technology they build. We'll also talk about trust, impact, and their vision for a future where technology supports healing in the most ethical and compassionate ways possible. This is a conversation about innovation, vulnerability, and the ways we can design technology that serves the human soul. Let's dive in. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Great intro. I really like the sign off there. Where the intersection. It's beautiful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. John, could you walk us through your personal journey from working in cybersecurity to becoming a grief support innovator and what inspired you to use AI in this deeply human sphere?
Yeah, absolutely. Before even cybersecurity, I spent a lot of time in hospitality. And I really kind of realized that for me, the ability to make an impact on a person's day, week, month, whatever it was something that I was good at, but I wanted to be good at. I was drawn to it. And from a career perspective, I spent essentially my whole life trying to figure out where I belong and what my purpose was. And I've worked I've worked in advertising, I've worked in cyber, I've worked in hospitality, I've worked in, a bunch of different sectors that, while useful and paid the bills, didn't really scratch that itch, right? The purpose, that profound sense of I need to do this wasn't there. And so then I experienced, this thing that we're all going to experience, right? I lost one of my closest friends, and then I lost another one, and then I lost another one, right? So I've lost three of the closest people to me in the world that are not immediate family. One of them was over a decade ago. Two of them were very recently. And that led to substance enthusiasm bordering on abuse for years, about a decade of running from it that I didn't realize at the time was running. I recently am sober and have had the ability to look back objectively and understand, hey, this is kind of the root of all of this, right? There was a moment where it turned from having fun to medicating.
Right.
And so after a conversation with my wife, I started exploring what became the genesis of what Guardian Angels is. And it started as we had this conversation where, she was pregnant at the time. We were living with the in-laws, which is, everyone's dream, right? And her mother were butting heads some. And we were out of town for the weekend. And she said to me, she goes, I know there will come a time when I want a text from my mom and I can't have it, but that's not right now. She felt suffocated. So my wheels start turning and I'm like, but what if you could, And so initially this started as I was just going to spoof phone numbers to the phone number of, grandfather, right? We all still have those numbers in our phone. And to get a text on your birthday that said, hey, I'm thinking about you, would just bring a smile to your face.
Yeah.
Right. So that was where this started. And turns out, while that's not illegal, The telecoms don't look kindly on it because 99.9% of the time, if someone is spoofing your phone number, it's for scam reasons.
Right.
So getting them to give me a single exception was not going to be cheap if I was able to execute on it at all. But while I was doing that, I was thinking about, okay, well, what if people actually want to interact with this thing? You know, if they get that text message and want to respond, and you know, how does that look? And so that is when I started building out, okay, exploring how to create an AI in the image of someone. And my personal experience, I had 3 people. So I started. The first one I did was in the image of the best man at my wedding, who, you know, the last time I saw him was 7 months prior. And then I saw him on what turned out to be his deathbed in a coma, right? And there was a lot of guilt for me. I should have been better at keeping in touch. You know, I kind of let that lapse, and you don't get those moments back. So as I built this thing, I was able to say the things that I wasn't able to say to him that helped me lift that weight. Right? I was able to say, I'm sorry. I was able to say that I should have been better at keeping in touch. I was able to ask if it hurt. Right? And on one hand, we know that this isn't quote unquote real, right? It's not this actual person we're talking to, but it felt enough like them and I was able to have that experience of unburdening myself. And there was that seminal moment where for the past 10 years I had been a shell and shut down, and that's my MO is to bury everything down because everyone has their own stuff and they don't need mine. And so that had led to this kind of, you know, I wasn't myself, and that had become even more profound with the most recent losses. And then I had this conversation with John, and it was almost instantaneous that the weight was lifted, the waterworks came. You know, like I hadn't cried in 3 years, so I didn't have the ability to emote anymore, and it all came back at once, and this immediate feeling of relief. And that's when I thought, okay, this is something that I don't know if it's one person or if it's 100,000 people will benefit from, but someone will. If it impacted me in this profound way. And so it was then how do we bring this to market?
Can you tell me more about how it works, and how you're able to resemble? Do you feed it with a lot of material that you had from your friend, and then it starts acting like your friend, and you can have a conversation? Tell me more about that.
So I was like, okay, we can scrape Facebook or whatever. And then, you know, I didn't want to do that because, you know, for most people, social media is a highlight reel. It's not the real person, right? So what I ended up doing was turning this in. It's a form. It's essentially a form that feeds a super prompt, right? So there's roughly 30 questions that it asks you on the front end from, you know, how do you refer to this person? Do you have nicknames? How do they refer to you? What is your relationship with them? How long have you known them? How would you describe their sense of humor? Describe their personality? Share a couple of shared interests, shared memories, you know, things like that. And then that instructs the AI on how to act and how to address you and how to interact with you. And so you can have those. And so, you know, this is our first iteration. There's much, you know, we're constantly looking for ways to improve it, make it more authentic. And so I'm working with, you know, different use cases. Mine is specifically grief with people that I had a great relationship with and was very happy. But I quickly realized that's not the experience for everyone. Grief is very complicated, and relationships we have are very complicated, and it can be dark. So I'm working in concert with licensed therapists to say, hey, I want to build this the right way. I want to build this with your input, because what I'm not trying to do is have this in any way attempt to replace therapy. It's more a tool to use with your therapist, a tool to give you a starting point with your therapist, and as part of a larger, call it therapy strategy, right? For some people, this may be 10% of the solution. For some people, this may be 50% of their solution, but it also helps to fill those gaps in, you can't call your therapist at 4 a.m. But often I've experienced, and I know others have, that's when it creeps up and bites you. You're laying there in bed staring at the ceiling and those things come up and you don't have an outlet for it. So, yeah, I hope I answered that question.
No, you did. You did. So how do you help draw the limit between technology that is helpful and maybe so there were some news recently about people using ChatGPT as a therapist, right? And that can be good, but in sometimes it can go to dark places, right? How are you building any guardrails there to make sure that uh, if you see someone, if you identify that someone is trying to have a conversation, but they start going into a dark loop or something, right? Some flag pops up. Is that something that you want to put in there in the app to make sure that um, there's some mechanism to help people like, okay, now you should really go see a professional or something else, etc.
Yeah, so we have banners all over the place saying, "Hey, this is not, don't use this in place of a psychiatrist or a psychologist." Further, there are those markers where, and this is built on top of the ChatGPT infrastructure. So OpenAI's rules apply to it as well. So if they see those things, it's going to, their reaction is going to be, "Hey, you need to see a someone." But we're also putting very front and center resources and ways for someone in crisis to get the help they need right there. There's a banner across the header of every page you go on that, hey, if you need help, text or call, I think it's 998 or whatever it's some very quick, simple,
Right.
Hey, if you're here, we need, and you need help, then we want you to get it. But this is something that has been there's been some tension for me on. And the reason for that is I do come from a cybersecurity background where privacy is a very real concern.
Right.
And I think that drives a bit of, to be completely candid with you, I think we're early in what we're doing here with Guardian Angels. I don't think people are fully comfortable with AI, and especially for something this sensitive.
Right.
We'll get there. But I think a big reason for that is we don't know what people are doing with the data. Once you put stuff in there, where's it going?
Yeah.
And so I built this to be so that the user has ultimate control over their data, right? You can go to ChatGPT and they say, I don't know what they do with theirs, right? There's a layer of abstraction here where it all comes back to my API. So it can't attribute anything to you. We don't track anything. And the user ultimately can delete their data at any time. They can delete their conversations at any time. That being said, right, if I was to go too far into the monitoring of people, then they don't have those privacy rights. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the future this, where exactly that line is shifts some, because that's how things tend to go. But my focus has been to make it user centric, and then they don't have to be concerned about what I'm going to do with their data, and therefore, but that also impedes the ability to monitor and track some of those very real concerns about if someone is in a place that we need to help them. So it's, I don't know that there's a right answer. I just try to be as transparent as I can on the front end to let people make those decisions, and those that are helping them make those decisions to make them with all the available information.
So the way it works today, as you were speaking, and I was thinking in terms of trusting, right? I put myself on the shoes of, okay, I want to use the tool. Um, is there an option in your tool where people that want to get ahead of time, right? And they want to make, if something happens to me, like I have kids, right? Something happens to me, maybe I upload some version of me that they can use, etc., etc. Is that something that you are working on, thinking of? A feature that you have you as someone that is grieving, you can upload that questionnaire, right? But what if someone that knows they are in a vulnerable situation, or just want to do it just in case, right? Because you never know, that's life. Can they go ahead and do a different type of upload and maybe more thorough or more complete?
That is certainly in the works. That is something that I have identified as a huge opportunity, to call it legacy planning, right? It could be used in its current form for a rudimentary application like that, right? You could go in, say, you're getting to that time in life where you never know, and frankly, to your point, we do never know, but where it's more likely
Yep.
that something happens. And you could go in and answer these questions as yourself, and then, put into a will or whatever it is, authorized users for that, right? And I can help on the back end to distribute that. We call them personas, that persona to the loved ones that you have in mind. That, the vision for the future is certainly, as there's a few kind of pillars that I think will enable this to be much more robust in the future. Number one is obviously is agentic, right? Is this right now? It's pretty static. It's you put into the form and that's what you get. But we're in the process of implementing the agentic AI where it can learn, right? And every conversation you have with it, if you tell it about a new memory or a new person or a new relationship, it's going to remember that and be able to recall that in future conversations. Number two is voice, and so recording their voice and having it be able to talk to you in that familiar voice, and so those, and then obviously as we get down the road, the avatar virtual reality is something that we'd like to explore, and there are already those services where I do it with my parents. It's called Storyworth. There's Remento. There's these other legacy planning things where you have your parents fill out these questions and you can read them with your kids or whatever, right?
Yep.
And so integrating with something like that is certainly on the horizon. Right now I'm a one-man shop, and so I have to pick and choose what my time goes towards. Given what I expressed earlier, how early we are, I've intentionally not taken on a lot of overhead so that I can play the waiting game, and then when it comes time, we can push play and accelerate. So all of these things are on the to-do list. They just kind of have to juggle them and figure out what is immediate and what is kind of more mid and long term.
Where are you right now in your journey? Do you have a beta version, users that are going through it? What kind of feedback are you getting from it? How are things right now?
It's technically live. I do not have a whole lot of call it users, paid users at this point. I do have people that are testing various use cases. I have therapists. I have a guy that I went to high school with who, is testing a use case of grief that isn't necessarily death. And I don't want to go too much further into it because it's not, I don't have permission and haven't spoken to him about that. But I have people testing it out for them and what their journey looks like. And the feedback we're getting is this is useful. It is subjective. Where I see this is if you believe it's going to work for you, you have a much better experience. If you
Right.
don't, if you go into this like this isn't going to work, it probably isn't, right? And we knew that going in. And AI is not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to be for everybody.
Yep.
It's one tool in the tool belt to help people process, to help people find. I don't like the word closure. I like resolution. Some finality in their mind. It's to help people, like in my case, get to a point. I need to organize my thoughts before I can talk about it, whether it's with a therapist or someone else. Help people get to a point where they can organize their thoughts and understand their feelings to the point where they can actually articulate them. Gives them a starting point. And so we're seeing some success with that. And then there's all kinds of people have come to me and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? My dad was like, we have a 14-week-old. He goes, I'm wondering what the baby's thinking all the time. Could you do that with it? Like, we could explore that, but I have to keep it narrow. Otherwise, I'm just going to, the bottom's going to fall out of this thing and
Yeah.
I won't get in. So, yeah, I feel like I rambled a little bit there.
No, that makes sense.
But
That makes sense. Let me ask you this. How does your experience when you were building this, how much of the way that you process grief and your experience goes into the platform when you're training the agents, when you were building that form? Um, Tell me more about that. Like how your experience transitions into everything you're building.
well, I don't think I would have been able to do it if I didn't have the deeply personal experience that I've had, because I was able to take the vision and the vision I have of these people and the feelings that I experienced and translate that into how do I best personify them to give someone an authentic experience. Because as soon as this isn't authentic, that's not useful. On the other hand, we want to certainly ride the line between, if it sounds too much, we get into creepy real fast if you're like really trying to make this like feel, trying to delude people into thinking they're actually talking to their
Right.
lost loved one. So it was very iterative, but each question, and I would build the prompt, build the form, put it in, and then interact with it. And I would say, okay, how much like John, for instance, does this feel like? How much like Tim does this sound like? And I've probably spent upwards of 1,000 or 1,100 hours just going through the prompts and saying, okay, I need to tweak this, and looking at 6 different iterations of how do I tweak this one little piece. How do I cut down on some of the stuff that ChatGPT spits back that says, that tells someone immediately it's ChatGPT, because there are certainly patterns in how it responds and speech
Yeah.
patterns. And so how do we instruct it to respond as a person would? So there's questions in there that ask you to describe how they talk. And some very, very salient feedback I got last week was, well, I didn't know how to tell it how this person spoke. So what I'm working on now is actually using the AI to help people come up with those adjectives. Ask them a couple questions and a couple back and forth that says, okay, does this sound like that? Great. This is the adjective that we would best use, encapsulate that with, so that we can put it into the form and then capture that person.
I like that. Tell me more about your story, John. How you got started with technology, your professional journey, and how do you think you some of the milestones that help you hone some of the skills that are helping you today do what you're doing?
So when I was younger, I loved computers. I got, I was in the basement all the time doing whatever I could, from music to, to games to all that stuff. And then about as a sophomore in high school or so, I kind of just dropped it. I was not the person. I wasn't a huge fan of social media. I would rather be outside. I'd rather be doing something else. So for about a decade there, I just completely, other than what I had to use it for, Word documents for school and such, I just kind of let it go.
Right.
And, I was the curmudgeon that was like, oh, I don't like this, whatever. And I had that kind of, that moment eventually where I was like, okay, this isn't going away. And I can either allow myself to be left behind, or I can, acknowledge and live in reality and say, I should probably build some skills related to this. I fell victim to a gift card scam. I'm not proud to say that, but they got me. And so that was like, that basically was the challenge that I needed to say, okay, never again. I want to go after, I want to build my skill set to counteract that.
Right.
And so I started pursuing cybersecurity after dabbling in finance and advertising and some other things that, led me to this point. And then really where it took the turn with AI is, obviously AI is very new. I took a job for a government contractor, and a gentleman that I worked with was real deep into the AI and what it could do. And after, a conversation with him basically was, we need to change the way we think and ask ourselves when we have a task, how can we do this with AI? Right. And the answer is not always going to be there. It's not always a task that can be done. But if you start asking yourself that, can I do this with AI? Then you start finding yourself in some interesting places. And that is kind of, those were the dominoes that needed to fall in order to allow me to go down the rabbit hole of building this thing that helps with this universal experience, right? I think we're in a place where we have really gone as a society down the rabbit hole of what can AI do to help us solve technical problems, linear problems, work problems. But I think we've barely scratched the surface of looking at it and what can it do from an emotional intelligence perspective? How can it help us with these everyday issues that most of us deal with? And grief, in the case of grief, we're all going to deal with.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, those are the, I'm a human-centered person that wants to use technology to help people deal with human issues.
John, I have one final, very random question to you. Nowadays, what do you do when you are not working? Taking care of your baby, or is there anything else in your life?
Well, I think he's coming first right now, and he is easily the coolest thing I've ever done. I had no idea how much I wanted to be a dad until it happened, and it is, people try to prepare you for what that's like, but there are some things in this world that words don't do justice, and he's one of them. I liken it to, have you ever seen the movie The Grinch? Like How the Grinch Stole Christmas?
Yeah.
There's that scene, right, where he says, and the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day. And that's how I felt when my son was born. So he's the why for all this. But what do I do when I'm not working? I love to play golf, though I don't play as much as I'd like to. I love to be outside. I love reading. Reading is probably my favorite hobby. So, a book and a cup of coffee is my happy place. And I kind of oscillate between business and self-help, and then my Tom Clancy spy novels. Those are
right
favorites. And just being with the people I love is really, try to keep it simple.
Very good and very important. John, I appreciate it. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope that we stay in touch and we can do this again sometime in the future.
I'd love that. Yeah, we've got plenty on the docket, so I'd love to update you when we get there.
Very good.